I know what I'm going to talk to Van about next time I see him. But, sometimes safety requires. Paul started preaching when a young man fell off the back pew. And, it's very dangerous to sit on the back pew. Bible says so. But anyway. Amanda handed me a note today, and I want to announce this and get this started. And I said, just write me a note so I can have something to say and at least get me going on this. We talked about a youngins. Having a youngins means that anybody that is 20 years old and older. And so if you're 85 and you feel like a youngin, you're welcome to come to this. What it is, it's going to be some finger foods and games. If you can't get a babysitter, don't worry. You can bring your children. We'll probably bring ours. But it's going to be in the fellowship hall. We're going to start Friday, February the 7th at 6:30. And this is just an opportunity for us to come together. And sometimes I feel like our, should I say, more mature members in years, how about that? They have a lot of fellowship. They understand and appreciate what it is to come together and for couples even to come together and they've been part of the church. But I think we need something for our young couples and some you don't have to be a couple, singles, anybody that wants to come can come. But we need a good thing to tie us together, to fellowship together and to grow those bonds together. And so youngins. And it's just really an opportunity to do that. You don't really know someone until you've played Uno with them. And so you've got some people that are pretty rough. Also on this note, and I told her I'd read this note, at the bottom of it, it says, dragons are real. Now, I don't know what kind of Bible class she's involved with, my wife is, but did you know the Bible talks about dragons? Did you know that? And fire breathing? I'll talk about it fourth Sunday this month. And I'll do a question and answer fourth Sunday, Sunday morning this month. All right, so that's out of the way. That's done. And I know some of the girls in class were wondering about dragons and different things. And maybe some of you adults I've piqued your interest as well. I guess it seems like I can't get going this morning because of the topic I want to talk about today. Valentine's Day is just around the corner. And it's about love. And it's about relationships and expressing that to people. And I guess it's about oftentimes couples or married couples and men, what are we going to do for our wives and that sort of thing. A lot of it is developed in the retail area in the sense of what are you going to buy for me. But I think I want to express today some things about marriage that, and I really want you to understand my motivation. Divorce is such a difficult thing for the Lord's church. It's difficult for the families. It's difficult for the homes. And as a preacher, I think I'm careful about subjects like this because, it affects all of us, doesn't it? There's not a person in here that hasn't been affected by it in some way or by some local or close relative or whatever you want to call it. See I'm stumbling? I just can't get going. All of us are affected by it. And I think the Lord's church is affected by it. So I'm going to spend 2 Sundays talking about marriage and some of the aspects of it. And then I'll probably spend next Sunday, the last part of the lesson, talking about and explaining what God says about marriage, divorce, and remarriage. I'm very cautious, though. I'm very cautious because I don't want anyone to think ill of my motivation. My motivation And I think the elders here, their motivation and Bobby's motivation here is to grow the church and for the work of the church here to go as well as it can go, to be as pleasing to God as it can be. And that starts with our homes being strong and our homes being as they ought to be. And you saw the sign, so I guess it's been on my mind for quite a while, really. I put that up. Marriage is not about finding that right person. That's what we teach our kids. Well, you find someone who's a Christian, you find somebody who's living like they should, and it's going to help you go to heaven, and that's great. But a big part of that is being the right person. Not just finding the right person, but being the right person. And so out of a motivation of caring and just worry, I want to talk about marriage today and how we can make our marriage what it ought to be. And then next week we'll talk about if it all falls apart, what does God say about it? All right. There's not a better chapter, I think, for dealing with people and how we ought to deal with fellow man than we find in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. And it's a chapter, and we call it the love chapter, and we understand it to be what God said about love. And so when I go and I find, and if you'll turn there, I'll be with you in just a moment. But I go and I look at that, and then I tie that in with Matthew chapter 19, starting in verse 3. He tells us, the Pharisees came unto him, tempting him, and saying unto him, Is it lawful for a man to put away his wife? And I'll just read this to you, and then I'll come to Corinthians in just a second. Put his wife away for every cause. And he answered and said unto them, Have ye not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female? And he said, For this cause shall a man leave father and mother, and shall cleave to his wife, and they twain shall be one flesh. Now watch verse 6 of Matthew 19. I'm going to read it to you. Wherefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. It was God's design from the beginning that it would be one man for one woman for life. And we would love for that to be the case in every situation. We'd love for that to never be altered and nobody ever come into a different situation. But God understood that sometimes there would be. God understood in the teaching of His Son that there would be times where it was just impossible. Verse 7, they say unto him, Why did Moses then command to give the writing of divorcement and to put her away? Now they're trying to trip him up. They're trying to get Jesus to say something and get him in trouble. But Jesus gives us very clear instruction. He even talks about what Moses said. He says in verse 8, Because of the hardness of your hearts, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, suffered you to put away your wives. But from the beginning, now meaning the way God designed it, from the beginning it was not so. And I say unto you, verse 9, I say unto you, who shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, committeth adultery. And whosoever marrieth her, which is put away, doth commit adultery. God, from the beginning, did not want man to divorce. He didn't want separation. He didn't want homes to be broken up. He didn't want it. He designed marriage to be this wonderful relationship. In fact, the most important relationship that a man could have with or a woman could have with another person on this earth. In fact, it's your number one relationship. I repeat this. I've said it before. I know I have, talking about our children. Men and women, fathers, mothers, your spouse is number one. Your children are next. It's in that order. And of course, God's first. God designed marriage to be that way. But it gets twisted around. It gets upside down sometimes. We neglect some things and suddenly we find ourselves in a situation 5 years before, 2 years before, however many years before, we say, I'll never do that. And then suddenly we find ourselves in that same situation. Well, God didn't want it to be that way from the beginning. And whatever state you find yourself today, whatever kind of a marriage, if you're a widow and you've remarried, if you're divorced and you're considered the innocent party and you're remarried, and maybe it's your first marriage, and you're sitting here today and you're listening to this sermon, I want you, and if you're on the internet and you're watching this sermon, I want you to have the best marriage. I hope you had a good wedding, but I hope you have the best marriage that you can have within the bounds of God's law. I want your marriage to be wonderful. And we're going to use 1 Corinthians 13 today to talk about this. It's really a chapter about love and what love is and what love isn't. It starts out in this chapter, it says, though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels and have not charity or love, I am become a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have faith so that I could remove mountains and have not charity or love, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned and have not charity or love, it profiteth me nothing. Love is everything, is what he's saying. He says you've got to have love. Your motivation has got to be love. Love minus or anything, any act, any good act minus love is just worthless. But now he tells us what love does for us and what love is. And in a marriage, it's never been more important to apply these principles. This love talked about in 1 Corinthians 13 is agape or sacrificial love. So I just want to take some of these points starting in verse 4 and just go through here and look at what love is and apply it to our marriages. Verse number 4 says, love suffers long. Other translations translate this as patient. Sometimes, guys and gals, we've got to be patient with our spouse, don't we? We've got to be patient. And I'm going to use my wife a little bit today, and I hope she doesn't get mad at me, but I had meatloaf last night. I have been so patiently waiting for meatloaf for years and years. She made it once before, and I don't know if we ate it. I don't remember, but it was a good attempt. But we were both so young. But she made meatloaf, and it was very delicious. And I don't know, for whatever reason, she hasn't wanted to make meatloaf. But patience is so very important in a marriage, isn't it? Patience for that person to become and to be if they're the husband, to be the leader they need to be, and you're encouraging them, and you're encouraging the things, the qualities that they need, and men, as you're encouraging your wife to be that wife you need, that Christian wife. You know, when we tell our kids to look for someone to marry, and they're looking at people they're going to date, what do we tell them? Find somebody that's going to help you go to heaven, right? Well, that doesn't end when we wed. Okay, well, I found them. They're perfect. They're complete. I'm done. No, they're still imperfect. They still are working. They're still trying, but I'm looking for somebody. If I was single, I'd be looking for somebody to help me go to heaven. That'd be what it is all about. That's what we want our young folks to do. And as we're married, we're still looking, we're still trying to have that person be that person that they ought to be. And it takes patience. How often has God been patient with us when we're not doing everything we should? Long suffering. Well, it's patience, isn't it? Love is something that is, and you know, lots of jokes are made about long suffering in marriage. It's not the way it is. It's just patience, isn't it? We're waiting on that spouse. We're waiting on them to be what they ought to be, and we're helping them every step of the way, and you know what? They're helping us. How often is it that God is slow to anger with us? You know, we really shine. Our character really shines as men and as women when we follow what Peter said in 1 Peter 3 and verse 7. It says, husbands, Dwell with your wives. Likewise, you husbands, dwell with them or dwell with your wives according to what? Knowledge, right? That takes patience. When you're learning something, you've got to be patient. And we're still learning one another. Marriages are continuance of knowledge and learning and giving and taking. And it's patience. So many young marriages they just don't wait. They don't allow their marriage to grow. They let a rough spot guide the rest of their marriage. They let a rough spot change the direction of their marriage. When they just be patient, that season passes and then the marriage gets even stronger. So many marriages just need patience. Of Matthew? Next Sunday. Okay, next Sunday I'm going to talk about that. But not today. I'm going to talk about our love being what it ought to be. And then what happens next Sunday is going to be when someone, you can't make someone do as you'd want them to do. You can't, there's two people involved. They have a will of their own, so they can make up their own mind. And sometimes one spouse just won't do what's right, or maybe both won't do what's right. And then what does God say about that? That's what I'm going to talk about next Sunday. That's right. Absolutely. I think we've got to do it His way, and that's what this is about this morning. Doing it God's way, meaning that I'm going to love God's way inside of my marriage, inside of any relationship, but especially in our marriage situations. All right. Well, what about love? Love is long-suffering. It's patience, right? What about being kind to one another? What about being kind? In 1 Corinthians chapter 4, it says, suffereth long and is kind. The one scholar said, Barclay said, love, meaning in the kindness of love, or agape love that is kind, says it's sweet to all. I've had that in my mind for so long. Sweet to all. I've known some people that were kind and just sweet to all. Just sweet to everybody they saw. Because they loved life and they loved what was happening in this world. And they understood that there was a bigger and better plan than just this world. And they were sweet to all. But what about in our marriages? We've got to be sweet to one another, right? What are you called when you're dating? Sweethearts, right? Oh, they're sweethearts. Or he's sweet on her, right? But that doesn't change when you're married. It better not. In fact, we've got to be sweet on each other, all of our marriage, to the best of our ability. Sometimes it's tough. Sometimes it's difficult to be sweet and kind to one another. But if we'll continue to date, and boy, if I'm preaching at anybody today, I'm preaching at the preacher. I need to go on some dates badly. We've been too busy. So you've got to go on dates with your spouse. And so we take the time to be continued sweethearts. And that's kind to one another. And it involves a lot more than that. They were trying to trip Jesus up in John chapter 8. The Pharisees brought a woman to Jesus taken in adultery, and they believed that they'd found the perfect thing to get the perfect prophet, to trip him up. And they knew if he didn't say what Moses said or required him to do, they could say he didn't believe in the law of Moses, and they could just trip him up in any sort of way. Well, Jesus was brilliant. He diffused this situation. He said in John chapter 8 and verse 7, he who is without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first. Let him cast the first stone. They didn't feel any kindness or compassion to her. But the question may be, whose side would we have been on? Ephesians 4 and verse 32 tells us we've got to love ye one another, right? divorce and marriage situations become very difficult, and people make assumptions. You know, we were joking back in the back about assuming, and we were talking about, well, I told Greg something, I can't remember what it was, but promoting, yeah, that's what it was, and encouraging one another to do things. And Bobby was encouraging everybody in there to leave him alone. But you know, we've got to encourage our brothers and sisters in every situation, because there's ugly things in this world. And divorce feels that way, doesn't it? And I just think that we can't afford anymore. We can't afford it. And so we've got to be kind. Young couples, please hear this. Be patient. Wait for those things to smooth out. When you're long-suffering and you get in a difficult spot, hold on. Get some help. Don't let it get so bad that it's already so ugly and everything's so bitter that you can't fix it. Be patient. Get some help. Work through those things, and in kindness towards one another. Remember what it was that caused you to date in the first place. Think on those things that are good. Well, because of time, we're not going to look at every single verse in 1 Corinthians 13, but look at this as well. He says, long-suffering and kind, envieth not, vaunteth, or love doesn't vaunt itself up, is not puffed up. So often, I think guys fall into this category more than the gals, but we think we may have it right. You know, we're men. We go out and we take authority, and we have motivation to do things. We're doers, you know. We get something done. We have a task, and this is what I'm going to do, and this is how I'm going to do it. And when it comes to marriage, it's all backwards, isn't it? We take everything by the horns, and we just say, this is what we're going to do. And now you've got this partner, this helpmeet, that's made entirely different than you. And she needs you to think differently. She needs you to communicate about things. She needs you to talk about your feelings. Right? We don't do that. Not very often. But we've got to dwell with them according to knowledge. And we're not puffed up. We don't know everything there is about love. But agape love teaches a man to live gratefully that he is loved. Grateful to the fact that he is loved and has been chosen. You know, I heard a statement not long ago about a woman or a man talking about the choices his wife made, and you know, this is true, I think. The choices his wife had made, he said, don't call those choices dumb, because you're one of her choices. Right? You're one of her choices. Well, think back about how patient you must be and kind you must be, and don't be puffed up. We can't ever offer less than what we've been offered by God. We're told in Ephesians 5, husbands, to love our wives even as Christ loved the church and He gave Himself for it. So there's a standard there that's set. And every marriage is called to that. Love your wives even as Christ loved the church. That's a lot of pressure. He gave Himself for it. And we'll talk about that section of Scripture next week, but there's great power and responsibility there. We represent that sacrificial love for our family. We represent what we are willing to give for our family. And it really goes both ways, though. How far are we willing to go? You know, people will go all kinds of distances, through all kinds of difficulty, to have a wedding and have a wedding the way they want. Or to get that person they want. They'll do all kinds of things. But then when they get married, will they go as far once they're married to keep that person? Sometimes it's lost in there, isn't it? Love is not puffed up. Love does not do things that will cause you to separate. All right. What about love does not seek? It seeks not its own. 1 Corinthians 13, he says, in following there, he says, does not behave itself unseemly, seeketh not her own. Another translation says that does not insist upon its rights. One theologian said, in this world there are but two kinds of people: those who always insist upon their privilege, and those who always remember their responsibilities. Those who are always thinking of what life owes them, and those who never forget what they owe to life. It would be the key to almost all the problems which surround us today if men and women would think less of their rights and more of their duties. Right? Take responsibility. You're taking on another person, and the Bible tells us, and I just read it a little bit ago in Matthew chapter 19, that the Bible tells us that those two are made one. Those two are made one. That's a new family. That's a two people coming together and being a new family in the eyes of God. And what God hath joined together, let not man put asunder. Well, you can do it yourself. The world doesn't have to come in. In fact, most of the time it's inside that relationship. When we don't seek the other's benefit is when problems begin. When we're not patient, when we're not kind, when we're not that long-suffering person we ought to be, when we are puffed up and think, well, I'm always right and I'm not going to listen to her side, I'm not going to listen to his side. Or when we're just plain selfish and we don't seek their benefit. You know, I said at the beginning, you don't want to find the right person to marry. You do, but for the sake of argument, you don't want to find the right person to marry. You want to be the right person. And the byproduct of that is you're going to find the right person. You can't seek your own and be the right person. Well, time is so fast when I guess I'm up here thinking about 100 different things and wanting to get it all said in just a short amount of time. But I want to encourage our young couples. Let's go on down here in 1 Corinthians 13, and the Bible says here in verse 5, doth not behave unseemly, seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil, rejoiceth not in iniquity, verse 6, but rejoiceth in truth, beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. Love in marriage is one of patience and bearing some things. There's going to be times where it's not like you'd like it to be. But God commanded His love toward us that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us, Romans 5 verse 8. And when I look at God and what His love was for me, and then I look at my life, shouldn't I be God-like? Shouldn't I be applying those things to my life? Love believes all things and hopes all things. I think we need that in our marriage. I need to believe the best. I need to hope for the best. I need to be striving for the best. And then, as we find at the end of the verse there, verse 7, love endureth all things. Let me encourage our young couples this morning, or all of our couples. Endure. Endure, endure, endure. Last. Stay married. Work together. Be patient. And you know, if we'll apply these principles found in 1 Corinthians 13, it'd be pretty hard not to be a good spouse, wouldn't it? If you're patient, if you're loving, if you're thoughtful, if you're not puffed up, that sounds like a pretty good spouse to me. Let me encourage you to those good principles. And as I said, next week we'll talk about what God says when all these principles are applied and you've done everything you can do and still yet divorce occurs, what does God say about it and your future? This morning, maybe you're here and you're not a child of His. Maybe you're here this morning and you're suffering, and God has convicted you and convinced you that you need to obey the gospel. Through His Word, you've realized the truth and you want to make those things right. You can do that. It's very simple. Simple obedience to the gospel allows you to be added to the church and be saved. It's a simple wording of the gospel. Well, this morning maybe you're here and you're suffering. You are a child of His already, and yet you've fallen short and you want to make those things right. This is a good time to come forward as we stand and as we sing.